The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Now the Pharisees approached Jesus and they asked him, is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife? They were trying to test him. Jesus said to them in reply, well, what does Moses command you? They replied, well, Moses permitted a husband to write a bill of divorce and to dismiss his wife. But Jesus told them, he did that because of the hardness of your hearts. That's why he wrote you that commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. It is for this reason that a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become what? Flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no one may ever divide. Now, when he was back in the house, the disciples began to question Jesus about this. He said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and she marries another, she commits adultery as well. The Gospel of the Lord. Amen. Please be seated. First, the good news. We can use a little good news here. And the good news is the way it was in the mind of God. The good news is the ideal in which we were created. The good news is, as Matthew Fox has pointed out, before there was original sin, there was original blessing. The good news is that in the mind of God, all should be one. The trouble is that God's plans in man's hands also often go south. And today they are going to go south. But not before we understand what that ideal is all about. In John's prologue, we have this beautiful ideal marriage between the Father and the Son and the Spirit. This between the Creator and the Redeemer and the Sanctifier. From the very, very beginning of time, it is this wonderful dance of self-giving and receiving. And the self-giving is so profound, the love is so overwhelming that it is inseparable. It's one. That's from the beginning. From the beginning, we find the very same theme in the book of Genesis. First thing we hear out of the mouth of God is that it's not good for man to be alone. So says a never married man, celibate, living in his own house, speaking to a group of vowed religious women. And yet the ideal is still there. And I also want to speak to those of you who are watching the live stream today, because the message in many ways probably more for you than it is for us. But the overarching message is that we are called to live in a community, the beloved community. This is the divine anthropology. The divine anthropology begins with communio, begins with coming together, begins with relationship, begins with relationships of love. That's the anthropology of God, and that's the way we are called to live. That is the ideal we always continue to strive for. That's not the anthropology of the modern world, of modern man. And that's the anthropology that was given to us in the Enlightenment by the likes of Hobbes and Locke, who said that basically it's all about the individual. We are monads. We are separated from each other. And so it's very easy to talk about my rights, my freedom, my choice. It's the modern world. And we may come together for transactions so that it will benefit me and maybe even benefit us mutually, but it's still always about me. While that may be the modern anthropology, it is not the biblical anthropology. For Genesis comes up and he says, I want to make a suitable partner for you. And so we hear in this magnificent mythical language, we know that all myth is true. It's not historical by any stretch of the imagination, because I don't know who was there taking notes while God was doing all this, but it's true. So God's creating this wonderful creation, this beautiful creation, and he's giving Adam, man, the ability to name them, because he's looking for a suitable partner for Adam. And he begins to name them. Of course, when you name someone, you usually have some kind of authority over them. I've got your name, I've got your number, I'm the one who's in control. So he's naming the animals. I think this is one of the dangerous things in the book of Genesis, because we get stewardship confused with domination, that we can use them for our own ends, and we're back to that individuality again. So he's naming them, and I can understand some of the names. I can understand why he names this the centipede, 100 legs. I don't understand where aardvark comes from. But he's having a good time. But none of them proved a suitable partner for the man. So what does God do? God puts the man asleep, his favorite position, and while he's in a deep sleep, pulls out a rib, closes up the hole, and forms a woman. Now, this is the first time and the last time in all of creation that a man gives birth to anything. And God had to have God's hand in this creation. And he beholds the creation, it is woman, and he looks and he says, this one at last is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. Now, from the beginning, there is a co-equality here. The male and the female are co-equal. Genesis is genius when it's talking about it. Later on, now we know the culture is going to go south. And by the time we get to Moses, by the time we get to the Pharisees trying to stump Jesus today, we're going to understand that, no, not at all. But that's not how it began. This one is called woman. Two co-equal partners. That brings us to the gospel. Today the Pharisees are questioning Jesus to trap him because they know the rules. And by the way, they begin with a question. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? And of course, like a good Jew, Jesus answers the question with a question. They asked the rabbi, why do you Jews always answer a question with a question? The rabbi said, why not? Well, that's what Jesus is doing. He's answering the question with a question. Well, tell me, what's Moses right? Well, he says, Moses said that a man can divorce his wife if all he's got to do is do a writ of divorce. Of course, this is very common in the ancient Mideast, especially even in the Muslim culture. All the man has to say is, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. The man can divorce the woman. The woman cannot divorce the man. He can put her away and out into the street where she has absolutely no support, and she's on her own. But she has no comeback. And Jesus says, no. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, God created them male and female. And therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They're no longer two, they're one. When I prepare a couple for marriage, I say, when you make those vows to each other, you are Bob, an individual, you are Mary, an individual. And when you've made those vows, If the power of the Spirit, which is the divine love in each and every one of you, comes together to join you together, you become a new creation. Bob Mary, you are a brand new creation. You are now one flesh. And after they say their vows, and the vows are wonderful because the vows have no if clause. There's no transaction in the vows between a husband and a wife. It does not say if you will stay handsome and have a full head of hair, or if you will be always a 30-inch waist. And it doesn't say anything like that. It just says, I choose you to be with you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. After I hear the vows, I always turn to the congregation, I slam the book closed, and I say, what God has joined together, no one may ever divide. And everybody smiles and everybody's happy, and they lived happily ever after. Except they don't. We know they don't. And I want to speak mostly to those of you who are at home right now, and ourselves, of course, because there isn't any family in the hearing of my voice who has not been touched by the reality of divorce. In my own family included, in my own immediate family included. It's part of what it means to be a human being. All of us have fallen short of the glory of God. Now, when the disciples get Jesus into this room by himself, they're asking him to explain it. Now, listen to what he's saying. It's very interesting. He says, if a man divorces divorces his wife for any reason, marries another, he commits a sin. But then he says, if a woman divorces her husband, wait a minute. Women aren't allowed to divorce their husband. So he's now just put her on the same equal terms with the man. But she's also in the same situation as the man. And that's really tough, because really wonderful, good, godly people get divorced. Sometimes it just falls apart. And the question is, what can we do about it? What is the compassio? What is the compassionate way to handle this and deal with this? And sometimes the second marriage, especially if they've discovered that they did not ask themselves, well, I don't know anybody who's ever walked down that aisle with their fingers crossed. You know, I think that when we walk down that aisle, and I've done it for 50 years, I've watched it, it's all hope, it's all future, it's going to be fine. Love can conquer all, and love really can conquer all, but they don't understand yet, well, what's going on. And so what do? Of course, the only thing the church offers if that happens, if they fall in love, they get divorced, and they remarry, is what's called the annulment process, which is a decent process, because it does force us to bring it up, look at it, then let it go. And most of the time, the church in that external process will say, okay, we grant the annulment. However, it seems like the only fault in the church that cannot be forgiven and healed unless you go through that external process. We can forgive abortion and murder and all kinds of terrible, terrible things. But if you marry, divorce, and remarry, the church does not want you coming back. And of course, Francis was so clear when he says the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect, it's medicine for the sick. And of course, Francis also then comes up with the cure. Especially for those of you who are at home. I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but in 2016, he wrote a letter called Amoris Laetitia. And into that letter he said, compassion. I'm beginning to believe in my senescence that compassion is the most God-like quality there is. It feels the pain. It feels, well, right now, what are we doing when we're celebrating Compassio for Mother Earth? And I loved in the opening prayer, it referred to the fact that Mother Earth and the animals and we are in many ways flesh of each other's flesh and bone of each other's bone. And when Mother Earth is hurting, we hurt. And when the refugees are being beaten at the border, we are whipped as well. And so Francis, when he looks at all these beautiful people who are taken away from communion, he has to do something. So he writes this letter, and it was very controversial, and a lot of people really crucified Francis for writing the letter, but he sticks to his guns. He says, there is that external form. It's a wonderful thing. He wasn't poo-pooing at all. But there's another form. And what I want to say to you, especially those of you who find yourself outside of the communion in the church, use the other. And that's simply going to a compassionate confessor, sitting down and talking. It is the desire of God that all may be one. It is the desire of God that we all be healed. It is the desire of God to recreate the creation as it was meant to be. We are called to help him in that incredible, incredible project of life.